So let me invite my panelists up to the stage. We have Matt Gratias from NSIN, National Security Innovation Network. We have Kevin Landtroop from the Capital Factory. And we have Nick Davis from Singularity University. Please come up. All right, this is going to be a very fast panel. We only have 30 minutes to cover innovation in general, especially around in the DoD. And so what I'm going to do is invite my panelists to first introduce themselves. They're all doing very, very important work, very different work from each other. And I feel we have a very good landscape from which you all can learn from. So with that, let me start. I'm from BMNT Partners. Essentially, I work with Pete Newell, some of you might know him. And we're kind of known as the Hacking for Defense company. Steve Blank is one of our mentors. And I've been in kind of this defense dual-use ecosystem for about 5 years right now. Matt, please take over.
Okay, I'm Matt Gratias. I'm formerly the Pacific Regional Director at the National Security Innovation Network, which was formerly known as MD5. So for the past couple of years, I've been building startup ecosystems in Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii on behalf of INSEN, which is a program office in the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Before that, I was at the University of Southern California for about a decade, and then was in the Navy for 6 years previous to that.
Good morning, MDO. My name is Kevin Landtroop. I'm a defense venture partner at Capital Factory. So Capital Factory is a startup accelerator in Texas. Our flagship's in Austin, but we also have a space in Dallas, and we have folks that do scouting and acceleration for us in Houston and San Antonio as well. Capital Factory is really unique among startup accelerators for a few reasons. One is we're not really focused on one particular technology or small cohorts. We bring between 100 and 150 companies a year into our accelerator program in 10 cycles. We try to touch every interesting company throughout the state of Texas. And the other really, really unique thing about what Capital Factory has going on right now is it has become kind of a center of gravity for defense innovation in that we have AFWERX. We have an AFWERX branch there. We have a Defense Innovation Unit branch there. We have National Security Innovation Network there. And most recently, the Army Futures Command has put their Army Applications Lab. It's taking up about a quarter of our 8th floor. So we're really excited to be able to kind of fuse all these different defense innovation business models together and learn from them and help deliver some really cool solutions.
Awesome. So Nick Davis, I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Solutions at Singularity University. For those of you that are not familiar, we are a think tank at NASA Ames Research Center focused on exponential technologies and solving the world's global grand challenges. If you ask your Amazon Alexa, that's word for word. I've practiced it a lot. My main role is I lead our enterprise division. So the world's largest brands, we help them think about the future technologies that are impacting their businesses. And specifically, we've got a whole practice around both defense contractors and defense that we are kind of launching here the last couple years. Hence why we are here today. My background is I'm also a venture partner at our fund, so Bold Capital out of LA. And I've, for a while now, been kind of focusing on the intersection between corporate innovation, startups, and venture funds. And sold a startup, still do some angel investing, things like that. And I went to UCLA, so, I mean, hence the rivalry on stage.
We got a rivalry here. Do not fight. Yeah, so you have a plethora of experience on stage here, folks who understand the corporate side, folks who understand investment, folks who have been working in the startup ecosystem. One of the first questions I want to seed our panel with is about defense innovation. One might say this whole concept got started, if you will, by Defense Innovation Experimental Unit almost 5 years ago now. Now we have AFWERX, now we have Ensign, we have Naval X, we have essentially Army Futures Command and Army Applied AAL, right?
Army Applications Lab.
Army Applications Lab. And we have some experience under our belt. We have AFWERX. What have we learned? What works? What doesn't work? And Nick, I'm going to have you start.
I like it. I think yesterday I spent a lot of time here listening in the room, and I think we've done work with DIUX, we've done work with several of the entities that you've mentioned, and I think for me the most exciting part is momentum. There's a lot of activity going on and around the network, and I know that in my days a while ago as a sailor, we didn't have exposure to entities like this, right? And so I guess as an innovation person, I'm super excited about all the activity. I say for our corporate clients in the bigger brands of the world, it's a lot of the same problems, right? So we've got a lot of interest, a lot of people coming with ideas, a lot of focus and attention around acceleration, venture partnering, co-creation, design thinking, all the buzzwords are there. The biggest thing I worry about always is execution, right? And I think it's a huge momentous task to say, for all the ideas and teams that are even in this building right now, how do we get them to scale is where it always becomes a challenge. And so as much focus needs to be on not just generating the buzz here at the front, it's the exciting part, but really following through to the end is where I see every large organization, have its challenges. But I'm excited about if any group can execute
I would say even in the private sector. I mean, that's really
Absolutely.
where you might think private world has it dialed in. They do not.
They do not. That's right.
How about you, Kevin?
So I'll echo what you said about, one thing that we've definitely learned is there's a ton of energy and interest in being a part of the defense innovation ecosystem. Just at Capital Factory, we have about 1,500 events a year of all varying sizes. A lot of them are kind of organically grown, the member companies and organizations that have their own meetups and stuff like that. Those events will typically draw around 40, 50 people. When we have an event that's either featuring or sponsored by one of our defense innovation partners, the attendance goes through the roof. We get 200-300 people show up, standing room only. We run out of food and beer every time. So we're working on that. But it's the energy and the interest is really interesting. So one thing I think that, another thing I think that we've learned is how much we don't know about what works. And that's what I'm really excited about. So you look across the different, kind of the three primary ones, we'll say DIU, AFWERX, and now Army. They all have completely different business models. The way that they find problems, the way that they do solution sourcing, and the way that they kind of accelerate those solutions towards some kind of transition strategy. It's all different. Army's, business model hasn't been demonstrated yet because they're going to announce their first, they're going to actually open their first challenge tomorrow in Austin. But I'm excited over the next, 2 years to kind of figure out what works among all those different business models. Air Force is, kind of, we'll say less discriminate about how they kind of, blast their money around. They're really kind of getting companies energized and wanting to do business with DoD. DIU is really more focused on one very discrete problem statement, and they want to work really hard to try to find a bunch of commercial solutions to bring into that. Army's solution is going to be more accelerator model based. But yeah, we don't know what works, and there are going to be different solutions that work for different types of problems, whether it's a hardware, software, the size of the company that you're working with, the level of scaling that needs, for transition. But that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Matt? You really see kind of, see across the DoD. Maybe you see some patterns that you can share with us too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that I'd like to kind of frame it as is what hypotheses are we validating currently? What can we say that we know for a fact right now? And obviously, sitting here today with 100 companies in the other room, we know there's a tremendous desire in the startup ecosystem to work with the DoD. We're validating that constantly. We know the engagement efforts are working. We recognize now that embedding in ecosystems, so we're talking about Kevin out at Capital Factory in Austin, and then we've got the AFWERX hub down the street here in Las Vegas. We've got Ensign in Los Angeles and in Boulder and in Boston and in Raleigh-Durham and elsewhere throughout the country. We've got all of these different entities that are now digging deep into the ecosystems and becoming a part of them. And so we're validating these insights that we know there are companies out there that want to work with the DoD. Okay. Part two, I would say, is that we understand that really good things happen when we commingle the talent pools. So traditionally, DoD has been much more insular, but we have some tremendous talent within the department. But what we're trying to do is to create opportunities for that talent to work with the top technical talent in these startup ecosystems. When they come together and work shoulder to shoulder with domain experts and with technical experts, what we're seeing is what comes out of that is better products and better capabilities. So creating further of those opportunities. Again, here, great shout out to AFWERX because that's exactly what we're seeing here today. Other things, probably what we also know is we're seeing challenges. New challenges, the ones we didn't expect. So we're starting to plan for anticipating for success. If our engagement efforts work if the desire and demand to work for the DoD remain steady or if they continue to increase. We understand that new workflows are going to be created for the teams that are running these programs, and which means we probably don't know yet what our next problems are. And so anticipating if our programs are successful, what comes next. Finally, I would say you can never go wrong if you take the perspective of the startup, right? And so for the government side, what's been really interesting for me over the past couple of years is seeing the folks within government that really get it. They understand what that startup perspective looks like, what it means to do business with the government when we are bad customers, and doing everything they can to be able to increase that, increase access, and increase opportunities, therefore, to get to programs or records and contracts.
What do you
Ellen,
mean by? Yeah.
Can I just piggyback on what Matt just said? So one of the things that we spend, from my perspective, and I think from a lot of the innovation cells perspective, is they're very externally focused, looking at the commercial sector and seeing what's out there, and how can we take advantage of, R&D that's happening, essentially through the venture model. But one thing that I think the Air Force is doing that's really cool, and I think Naval X has a central kind of pillar of their existence on this as well, is looking internal at talent. I know, so with Kessel Run and AFWERX just launched an AI ML kind of coding academy where they're going to train, I think, 30 airmen to, become AI coders. So what other things like that are happening? Because I think that that's a really interesting pool of capability that I'm not directly focused on, but I'd love to learn more about in terms of how are we using these different structures to look inward.
So I, at least for that question, I do work a Navy program, and so when you alluded to the Navy working, they're taking maybe some of the lean startup methodologies, and even the Defense Innovation Board has a lean startup course where they're going into defense organizations, and I think even Ensign has some of this where you're going, where essentially you're seeding the R&D community with some of these agile thinking skill sets. Leverage design thinking not for the workshop purpose, but for how do you actually aggregate diverse talent quickly, get a lot of diverse ideas, and actually move the ball forward. So that's really what I'm starting to see, and hopefully that starts changing maybe the approach to problems or adds a dimension to the approach to problems. I also find that working within the construct of the DoD organizations, however, is that the organizations themselves, because of the IT structures and because of the inherent possibly multi-domain arena that we have to operate in, conversations stop very quickly, which is a challenge, I think, that we have to overcome. So hopefully that answers some of the question.
Yeah.
And thank you for that. So next question I have, as we talk about this ecosystem, in recent 2018, 2019, maybe not so much 2015 when DIU started, I'm starting to hear a lot of conversation around dual use technology, dual use investment, and I think, and I went and did some research, and the DoD's had a dual use strategy, actually official program, even in the late 90s. So the question I have for everyone here is, what's the good part of dual use and what are the pitfalls? What could the pitfalls be? And I'll start with you, Kevin, see if you have any insights there.
Yeah, so I think that the focus on dual use really it opens the aperture of different types of companies and solutions that you can engage with. You talk to any seasoned venture capitalist and you ask them about valuation for companies for B2C, B2B, and B2G. Which one's going to be the lowest, right? B2G, because the sales cycles are super long. You're kind of capped at your profit margins. Everything's very, proposal based, and so they don't necessarily want to be looking at companies that are going to be solely B2G, right? And I think that a lot of the innovation cells that are popping up around DoD problems, I know that from the Army's perspective, that's going to be a kind of a big constraint for them, is they don't really want companies that are solely established around solving defense problems. They want companies that are solving business problems that can then be transitioned into military or defense problems. And I think that's a huge plus. It really opens you up to the whole range of venture-backed companies throughout the country. And in Capital Factory, we have, I don't know, there's probably 30 to 40 companies that I work with on a fairly regular basis. 2 of them are companies that have been built specifically to solve defense problems. And when I talk to those founders, quite frankly, I tell them, That's not a great model. You know what I'm saying? And
Small market.
yeah, one of those, of those two companies, one of them is really struggling, and the other one kind of has a model, but it's a services-based model where they hop on seated contracts and they use kind of that pipeline to help build their product. But all the rest of them are companies with really great commercial products that have good military applications. And so, I think it's the right solution because you're doing exactly what the hypothesis says you're going to do, which is leveraging all of the R&D that's going on out there in the technology sphere that's venture funded, and trying to turn that towards defense problems.
So hopefully we tell these companies, hey, you have a great commercial solution. Let's not retweak it so that it all becomes like a stovepipe. So how about you, Matt? What are your observations?
That's the challenge right there, right? So if you're looking at dual use, you're looking at the adjacency of the commercial solution to the defense solution. If the DoD comes in to a commercial company and says, look, we love that solution you have right now, but you need to change X, Y, and Z, and we're not going to pay for it, that's not a good dual use strategy. And so I think the other part is looking at it kind of dual use in terms of applications, what currently exists in the commercial market that we can utilize, versus a dual use go-to-market strategy. And here you're seeing companies use this quite smartly. And here's what I mean by that. In certain instances, markets just aren't mature enough on the commercial side to really be able to have a pure commercial play. Yet here in the military and the DoD side, you've got some very elite operational units that can use high technology devices or products in a way on an early adoption curve style. So if you can pair that, early adoption, early users, with some non-recurring engineering funding through programs like SBIR and OTAs and other type of rapid funding mechanisms, you can now fashion out a strategy where, as you wait for the commercial market to mature, you're getting really great use cases coming out of the military. Then the commercial market matures and you enter it that way. And so it's that cycle back and forth for a company when it makes sense to pursue defense, when and where and how really is a key component. Understanding that from the department side is, I think, also a continuing challenge because we may go after companies that it just doesn't make sense for them really to do business with DoD for many reasons. And we just have to simply accept that and hope at a later time we can have access to that technology.
How about you, Nick?
I agree with both. There's probably not a lot more to add, but to your point earlier on just the momentum, right? We were talking about this backstage of just how much excitement's going into a lot of these cells. I do find it interesting as someone who's a veteran, as well as an entrepreneur, as well as a venture capitalist. People want to engage, right? These are tough problems that you all are trying to solve for, and I think the average American is super excited to come and try and solve these problems too. And so for me, what I find really exciting, passionate, a lot of my, I'll go this with patriotism, is really excited about the fact that entrepreneurs love solving really hard problems. And just because the government may be difficult to work with in some cases, doesn't mean they're not going to try, right? And I do think that there's a really good marketing, branding, momentum play there to get a lot of people really engaged in solving. When it comes to cyber and other things that we're looking at, they're really, really tough problems that we can't lose, right? And so, there's a lot of people in Silicon Valley, a lot of people doing this work that if we leverage them in the right way, it's powerful work.
Completely agree. It's really the challenge that juices people. It's really, maybe you might make some money, but it's really how do you really burn your brain cells and try to collaborate with folks. So I'm going to mix it up a little bit and ask each person an individual question from their background so you can learn from their perspectives what they're doing. So I'm going to start with you, Kevin. So you at Capital Factory has an accelerator. There's a lot of startups. How do you think, or what should the government do to properly access accelerators?
So before we do that, I just want to make one more comment that piggybacks on what both of you guys just said on the last
Jump
thing.
in there.
Which is, you said something, when is the right time for a non-traditional company to try to do that transition to a defense line of business? And this is a conversation that I have with a lot of our companies. And the conversation almost always goes to this point, which is, what's the point where it's no longer a distraction for you? Like, do not take on a project, do not try to go after a government,
Good point. Yeah.
a government problem that's going to be a distraction from your main line of business, which means one of two things. It's either this is a problem you're already working on, this is something that you wanted to work on, and you were trying to figure out a way to fund your strategy to go after that solution, or the contractor itself is valuable enough that it's not a distraction, it becomes a priority, right? And so that's a discussion that we have with a lot of these companies. that's always a challenge, just trying to figure out when's the right time to do that. So back to your question. So what can the government learn from startup accelerators, or how can the government use startup accelerators? I think it's a lot of the things that we've already talked about. So what are startup accelerators good at? What's venture capital all about, right? There's a few ingredients. One is you got to have a good team. You got to have a market and an idea to capture that market. You need to have a product. You need to have a scaling strategy, and you got to figure out when's the right time to add money so that you can scale that product, right? So those things that startup accelerators do quite well are all of the same kinds of problems that we're trying to solve with innovation, right? So I'll give you 2 examples. What's the biggest fault of the SBIR program? Phase 3, nobody gets there, right? There's no transition strategy whenever you submit that phase 2 proposal. In theory, there's supposed to be a phase 3 transition strategy, but the reality of it is that it never gets realized. People build a product, and then that product goes somewhere. No venture capitalist is going to give you $1 unless you have a phase 3 strategy, right? I mean, that's the whole point, and I think that's something that they do quite well. And the second thing is finding that commercial market. We know that we need to look for companies that have a good commercial market, because we want that commercial demand to drive product development that's going to really result in the innovation. And that's another thing that I know that at Capital Factory we do extraordinarily well. One of the key components of what we do at Capital Factory is our corporate innovation partners. So we've got ExxonMobil, Microsoft, Google, but we've also got like BAE Systems and Northrop Grumman and Booz Allen and CACI and SEIC, and all of these companies are huge potential customers for our startups. And so helping find that commercial customer that's going to drive that product development, that's going to ultimately result in something that can solve a DoD problem, I think are the kind of the 2 big things that we offer in the accelerator community that the DoD should really latch onto, and I think they are.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of opportunity there to engage. So Nick, from your corporate innovation perspective, working with large organizations, oxymoron. But I'm sure you have a lot of observation. So how does an organization think about its systems? Maybe the timing and pace and scaling. You talked about scaling, and that's a challenge. And maybe what are some of the process issues that you think could be relevant to DoD as it starts moving forward?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'll stress is a unified vision for where you're trying to go in the future. And so I'd say the area that we probably see, I don't care if it's government or private or universities, all the entities that we work with around the world tend to trip because they're all running internally at a different speed around each other. And let me illustrate that. So a story I'll often tell is last year we had one of the largest insurance companies in the world in a room with us, and we had one of our quantum faculty on stage. We were talking about the idea of Robo Advisors, right? So when will you call into this company, and the entity that answers the phone sounds like a human but is actually artificial intelligence giving you financial advice? So who believes in this audience that that's going to happen? Raise your hand. If your hand's not up, you're wrong, first off. Second, when becomes the question, right? So every hand went up. It was the CTO, the CIO, and the entire technology staff of a very, very, very large global insurance company. And so when I asked, when should you start investing because you just all agreed that that is your future? Not one human in the room agreed on what timing looked like. One said 5 years, one said 10 years, one said 7 years, one said we're 2 years behind. It's that misalignment of where we're going that I see causing the most problems, right? Because we can do a lot of innovation stuff. We can fund accelerators, we can fund startups, we can do ideation challenges until get every idea that we can possibly get. But if we're investing our resources and time at different timelines to realize that future, ultimately it's a lot of wasted activity. And what I see sadly happen a lot is it gets to be too much and people start to just fragment out. And so my biggest advice as I see all these things going on here is, and I love General Harris's comments this morning, building that vision of the future for where you're trying to go, and then investing your resources on startups, venture capital, projects that you're working on to realize that future is the single biggest activity that we see working for both our defense and private clients.
So what are your tips for doing that?
We use sci-fi a lot, and so for us, it's a really interesting exercise to literally build a comic book of that 10 to 15 year out future that you're trying to do. And so for a couple of the companies that are here, we've done like future of security, future of flight, future of defense. And we'll literally build out personas that are about 15 years out, and we'll illustrate them out either in comic book format or video to start to build a unified vision of what that looks like. And it's not like just a fun, 2 days in a workshop kind of an exercise, right? We're using real data, real technology, all the insights that we've got from our faculty around the world that inform that vision. And then we back that up to today and say, if that's what we're trying to achieve, that particular instance for whatever security application, that's the three startups that we're investing in, not these other 10. And it all is in that activity to run at that same speed.
Great, thank you so much. So Matt, for you, looking at across the innovation ecosystem, I guess you know what the key ingredients are. What do you think we're missing for the DoD?
Great question. I'm a huge fan of a pipeline approach, and what I mean by that is going and understanding where if we're starting from the concept stage, just the idea stage, TRL 0, and we know we've got to get all the way to TRL 9, what does it take along the way, and what is the commitment to the companies that we have to be making? So one of the things we were talking about earlier is time, this understanding of if we're building ecosystems, so Brad Feld will talk about it and say, you've got to put 20 to 30 years into an ecosystem if you're truly going to help build it. That's a huge commitment. Now, most of us, even if we're in government, aren't going to spend that long in a particular ecosystem building function. If we're in uniform still, we may rotate every 2 to 3 years. So it's very difficult to have that kind of staying power. But then you add on top of it the fact that if you're making a venture investment into a startup, that's a minimum of a 10-year commitment. With IPO, time to IPO raising almost every year now. So there's a sense of the type of time that it takes and investment and services and support to really put a company into a pipeline through an accelerator and then have somebody catch it on the way out. Quick question here. Who here in the audience is either from a program executive office or a program management office?
Some over here, some in the back.
Right?
Just a few.
So integrating our innovation efforts with our program office efforts so that we understand what the goal is and where that capability is going to transition to, as you mentioned, phase 3s. Space and Missile Systems Center just announced today a $47 million phase 3. Why is that a big deal? Because there aren't enough of them, right? So it's news, we did it, right? Awesome, great, there's one in getting those data points. So the other thing I would add is starting to really be able to chronicle and collect those data points in a reportable format so that we can keep our venture partners informed of market sizes, who's doing what, so that they can build into their risk portfolios when they think a company could get a potential type of contract. What would that look like, and be able to understand that so they can market size appropriately and make the business decisions based off it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yes.
Just one little note. I'm going to say an ugly word in this room, failure. As he talks about stage gating startups or ideas through a pipeline, the first 2 or 3 steps is going to be a lot of failure. And we have to get comfortable with that from a cultural standpoint. So just setting up your metrics, how you think about moving one from one stage gate to the other, and knowing that a 5% hit rate is awesome.
Did you just basically point at the elephant in the room, especially for program managers?
It's learning, it's not failure.
Right. We love to switch that work, learn from each one, but a lot of them are going to perhaps not work the right way. So get comfortable with it.
Yeah. I think that's probably one area that DoD does need to work. At least in my work, the failure is a bad thing. It's like everything starts getting more
Always
risk averse,
Yep.
and then it's like, no, there's no failure, and you're like, okay, there's something's wrong, and you can't kill programs either. So that's another one.
And this is a great point, because you can look at the companies on the demo floor today. Some of them are going to fail. Some of them won't get contracts, certainly, right? This isn't big news. What's interesting, though, is the ones that do fail may recombine in a new way. And that's something that we see in robust ecosystems where, hey, you tried something for 9 months, it didn't go, you've got another buddy, she's awesome at something, you join it together again, and you take another stab at it. Those types of recombinations are made possible because you can create these opportunities for collision like we're here today. But thinking about failure in that way of trying it out, iterating, and then recombining, and again, it goes back to talent and how you're structuring that talent for a mission.
Absolutely. So as we build these ecosystems, we have to make sure those types of support structures are there, and we encourage that. So I am at time. I'm just going to have each of our panelists give one parting statement. Matt, go for it. Okay.
I'm super hyped up. Okay. And the thing that gets me very hyped up is when I see really top students in a program like Hacking for Defense taking on hard problems and getting excited about it. And that excitement is really enthusiastic. And it's the future. And you see it. And as you're mentioning patriotism, right? It gives you this sense that even though there's great challenges, I think we have opportunities to beat those.
Thank you. Nick. Oh, sorry, Nick. I'm mixing it up.
We talk a lot about exponential speed where we work. So the pace of change is never going to be slower than it is today. So urgency, live with it, because we are going to experience a lot of these changes much faster than we predict. You're doing the great work. Well done.
I agree. And Kevin?
So I'll close this bouncing something or off of something that Matt said is these companies, as they learn from the contracts that they did not get, they're not products, they're people. And those people started companies because they have that drive to solve a problem and build something and scale it. And it's that spirit from those people that are gonna solve these problems.
Thank you all. Give it up for everybody.
Thank you, Ellen.